The episode opens in modern-day Japan, introducing Hitomi Kanzaki, a high school girl with a love for tarot cards, fortune-telling, and running track. She's a typical teenager, bubbly, curious, and somewhat dreamy, but she also has mysterious psychic flashes, such as glimpses of future events. Hitomi has a crush on her upperclassman and track team captain, Amano Susumu. With encouragement from her friend, she decides to confess her feelings. As a part of her unique way of expressing herself, she proposes a challenge. If she can complete a 100-meter sprint in under 13 seconds, Amano has to grant her a wish. He agrees, and she sets her stopwatch and begins her run. However, before she can finish, her pendant, an heirloom from her grandmother, begins to glow. A column of light suddenly bursts down from the sky, and from within it, a mysterious young man carrying a sword, Von Fennell, appears right on the school track. Moments later, a dragon materializes through the same light, roaring and charging after Vaughn. Hitomi and her friends are stunned, watching as their reality shifts into something out of a fantasy novel. Vaughn, seemingly unfazed by the modern world, engages the dragon in battle. Hitomi, though terrified, suddenly has a vision of the dragon's movements, another of her unexplainable psychic premonitions. Using her pendant as a kind of focus, she shouts to Vaughn, warning him where the dragon will strike next. With her help, Vaughn lands a fatal blow and kills the dragon, retrieving its glowing energist from its chest. Just as the battle ends, the same pillar of light that brought Vaughn now activates again, only this time it sweeps both Vaughn and Hitomi into it. The light vanishes from Earth, and they disappear before the eyes of Amano and Hakari. Hitomi wakes up in a completely different place, a mysterious, lush world with twin moons in the sky. As she looks up, she sees the Earth itself suspended above her. Vaughn tells her she's now on the world of Gaia. Hitomi Kanzaki wakes up in a completely foreign world, a planet called Gaia, where Earth is known only as the mystic moon hanging in the sky. Confused and scared, she finds herself with Von Fennell, the young warrior who brought her here. Vaughn explains that he was completing a ritual to become the king of Fennelia, which required slaying a dragon. Hitomi had been accidentally swept along when he activated the dragon's energist. Vaughn brings Hitomi back to Fennelia, where the people celebrate his success and prepare for his coronation. Hitomi tries to adjust to the strange customs and medieval setting, but she feels completely out of place. Despite this, she grows curious about Vaughn's world and his responsibility as a young king. Part of Vaughn's ascension involves awakening Escaflowne, an ancient and legendary Gaimalef, a powerful mech linked to Fenelia's royal bloodline. During a sacred ceremony, Vaughn successfully reawakens Escaflowne, proving his right to rule. However, their victory is short-lived. Without warning, Zaibok, a powerful empire known for its technological and military dominance, launches a sudden attack on Fenelia. Their forces, hidden by cloaking technology, appear out of nowhere, overwhelming the kingdom's defenses. Fenelian soldiers are slaughtered, buildings are burned, and the people have no way to fight back against Zaibok's mechanical Gaimalefs. In the chaos, Hitomi experiences powerful visions, warning her of impending danger. She uses her newfound abilities to help Vaughn avoid deadly attacks. Vaughn, realizing the kingdom cannot be saved, grabs Hitomi and escapes using Escaflowne. As they flee, Hitomi watches Fenelia, the kingdom Vaughn swore to protect, be reduced to ashes. Vaughn, devastated, vows to get stronger and uncover the reasons behind Zaibok's assault. Hitomi, still unsure why she was brought to Gaia, decides to stay by Vaughn's side, realizing that her fate is now tightly woven into his. The adventure and their battle for survival has only just begun. The pillar of light separates Vaughn and Hitomi, dropping them in different parts of a forest, while a man with glasses observes from a distance. Vaughn realizes he's still on Gaia but doesn't know where Hitomi is. Nearby, Hitomi sits under a tree, unsure of what to do. As she holds her pendant for guidance, a fat, bald man with glasses suddenly attacks her. Hitomi screams, alerting Vaughn. Before Vaughn can arrive, a white owl swoops in and attacks the man. Its owner, a tall, blonde knight named Alan Shezar, who closely resembles Amano, appears and punches the man unconscious. Mistaking Alan for Amano, Hitomi breaks down in tears and faints in his arms. Alan picks her up just as Vaughn arrives. Vaughn challenges Alan despite his warnings and is quickly knocked out. Elsewhere, the Zaibok floating fortress Vione hovers above the ruins of Fenelia. Inside, a young and arrogant commander, Dilandau, punishes his men for failing in battle. He meets with Fokin, a mysterious cloaked man with blue hair. Fokin activates a projection of Emperor Dornkirk, who says that the dragon still threatens Zybok and must be captured. Dornkirk also sensed the mysterious Pillar of Light. Hitomi dreams of being with Amano, who claims she has amnesia. She then wakes in a real bed with Alan standing over her, surrounded by his soldiers. Realizing she's still on Gaia, Hitomi cries. Alan comforts her and promises protection. Vaughn is brought in, clearly unhappy. Later, outside the fort, Alan learns that Hitomi is from the Mystic Moon. Vaughn wants to return to Phenelia, but Alan reveals it has been completely destroyed. Just then, the Vione flies overhead, releasing multiple cloaked Gaimalefs. Dilandau arrives at the fort demanding supplies. Vaughn and Hitomi watch as he questions Alan about any unusual Gaimalefs. Alan denies seeing any. When Dilandau mocks Phenelia and its king, Vaughn is enraged and accuses him of cowardice for using invisibility in battle. Dilandau dismisses him and turns to Hitomi, curious about her odd clothing. Alan lies, saying she's from the East and is his girlfriend, even kissing her cheek. Both Dilandau and Vaughn are stunned. Hitomi wonders if Alan is the winged boy from her visions. Later, Hitomi tries to read Vaughn's fortune, but he's skeptical. When she draws the death card, she sees a vision of burning ruins and Dilandau. Vaughn shakes her out of it. Suddenly, the mole man, who had attacked Hitomi earlier, bursts through the floor. He guides them to the Gaimalef hangar, giving Hitomi her duffel bag that was transported with them. Vaughn decides to leave for Phenelia in Escaflowne, but Alan confronts him in his own Gaimalef, Sherazade. To leave, Vaughn must defeat him. They duel as Alan's men watch and bet on their commander. Vaughn impressively holds his own, even scratching Sherazade. Eventually, Alan overpowers Vaughn and forces him to surrender. As Vaughn exits, Hitomi approaches Escaflowne. The Energist glows, triggering a vision, Alan's fort engulfed in flames. Hitomi collapses to her knees, her vision of the fort's destruction leaving the surrounding men confused. Alan jumps out of his Gaimalef, Sherazade, and asks if she's all right. Hitomi warns that invisible Gaimalefs will soon attack, but no one believes her. When they learn she's from the Mystic Moon, panic spreads, as many think it's a bad omen. Alan calms them down. Just then, Alan's soldier Teo returns, bringing a mysterious captive, Merle, tied to a horse. Vaughn rushes to untie her and asks about Phenelia. Merle confirms the worst. The kingdom was burned, its warriors slain, and survivors scattered. Hitomi then faints after having a vision of herself standing in Phenelia's wreckage. Meanwhile, aboard the Vione, Emperor Dornkirk tells Fokin they must capture the dragon to preserve their ideal future. Dilandau eagerly takes the mission, saying the dragon is at the fort. Fokin expresses concern about Zybok attacking Asturia's ally, but Dilandau plans to use invisibility cloaks to avoid detection. Back at the fort, Vaughn and Alan care for Hitomi and Merle, who are recovering in bed. Hitomi looks out the window, wondering if her mother is worried. She remarks that Alan's mother must be beautiful, prompting him to reflect on his past. He recalls playing with his younger sister as a child and watching his mother die from grief after his sister vanished. Hitomi feels unsure about her growing feelings, while Alan is surprised at how much he's told her. Later, Vaughn notices something strange on Merle's face and takes it to the mole man, who gives him medicinal leaves. Outside, Alan speaks with Gaddis, confident that Zybok will attack based on Dilandau's expression. He orders the crusade to be prepared. Hitomi and Merle, now awake, stare at each other with mutual suspicion. Merle gets angry when she realizes she's on a bench, startling Hitomi. Suddenly, Hitomi sees a brief vision of a red Gaimalef. Vaughn enters with the medicine, and just as Hitomi senses danger, Zybok launches a surprise attack. The cloaked Gaimalefs tear through the fort, setting it ablaze, while Zybok responds with lethal fire. Alan checks on his injured men and learns the enemy has entered the underground tunnels. Vaughn demands Escaflowne, but Alan says it's already on the crusade. Though Vaughn wants revenge, Alan insists they retreat. Saving lives is a samurai's duty. The crusade launches as Hitomi and Merle are brought aboard. Dilandau watches his destruction with glee, but Fokin urges caution. Alan joins the ship by leaping from a cliff, and the dragon slayers follow. Dilandau attacks, damaging the crusade. Vaughn, realizing Alan was right, heads to the hangar and boards Escaflowne. Transforming it into a dragon, he takes flight. Dillendow recognizes it as the dragon Dornkirk spoke of and gives chase. As the Crusade struggles with damage, Vaughn flies ahead, with Dillendow declaring the hunt has begun. The Allsides team chases Escaflowne through the sky. Dillendow opens fire, landing several hits and forcing Escaflowne to transform into its humanoid form and crash to the ground. The enemy Gaimalefs land and vanish using stealth cloaks. Suddenly, one of them grabs Escaflowne from behind, and Dillendow drops his cloak, standing right in front of Vaughn. He viciously beats Escaflowne until it collapses. Watching from the Vione, Fulkin orders Dillendow to stop, reminding him they need the pilot alive. Vaughn is captured. Later, the Crusade's crew arrives at the smoldering battlefield, but Vaughn is gone. While Alan believes Vaughn won't be killed, the others want to strike back. Hitomi insists she can locate Vaughn using her abilities. Skeptical, Alan asks her to prove it. The Vione remains hidden in a crater surrounded by floating levistones. Inside, Fulkin and Dillendow inspect Escaflowne. Fulkin cuts his finger and touches the crystal on Escaflowne's chest, causing the machine to release Vaughn. Dillendow realizes Vaughn is the king of Finalia. Vaughn lies unconscious on the floor. Meanwhile, Zybok's scout units unknowingly pass over the Crusade, which is undergoing repairs in a ravine. Inside, Hitomi performs a tarot reading on Alan. She brings up his estranged father, predicting a reunion soon. Though surprised, Alan lets her continue and accepts her ability. He shows her a map and asks her to locate Vaughn. Vaughn awakens in a dark room where Fulkin is whistling a Fenelian tune. Vaughn sees his sword and demands answers. When Fulkin refuses, Vaughn tries to take his own life, but Fulkin disarms him and reveals his mechanical arm and wings. Vaughn is shocked. Fulkin is his brother. Vaughn demands to know why he betrayed their kingdom, but Fulkin offers no explanation. Instead, he suggests Vaughn meet Emperor Dornkirk and knocks him unconscious. Back on the Crusade, Hitomi struggles to pinpoint the floating fortress until Merle hands her the bandage Vaughn once gave her. Using it, she locates the Vione hidden in the Levistone Mountains, then collapses from exhaustion. Meanwhile, Dillendow examines Escaflowne, curious how Fulkin was able to activate it. As he touches the Energist, it triggers a surge, shaking the Vione and waking Vaughn. The Crusade then approaches the fortress and anchors itself. The crew boards and clashes with Zybok soldiers. Vaughn listens to the noise outside, still locked in his room. Alan defeats a soldier named Shesta and forces him to lead the way to Vaughn. Meanwhile, Hitomi has a vision of Dillendow ambushing Vaughn. She leaps across the gap between ships, reaching the hangar just after Vaughn. Above, Fulkin tosses Vaughn his sword and leaves. Dillendow sneaks up, but Hitomi's warning saves Vaughn. After a brief clash, Vaughn strikes Dillendow in the face. With Dillendow down, Vaughn and Hitomi flee. The others retreat back to the Crusade, escaping while Fulkin and Dillendow watch in silence. Vaughn thanks the crew, while Alan sets course for Pallas, the capital of Asturia. Vaughn grips his sword, his expression grim. The Crusade arrives at Pallas, capital of Asturia. Hitomi quietly watches Alan, wondering if he resents her. In the hangar, Vaughn broods over his sword, thinking about Fulkin. Once the ship lands, the group steps out and admires the ocean view. A blonde woman on horseback rides up and greets Alan warmly. She is Milerna, the youngest princess of Asturia. Alan introduces her to Vaughn, and she recalls meeting Vaughn and his brother years ago in Fenelia. Alan borrows Milerna's horse to meet King Aston. Mistaking Hitomi for a servant, Milerna asks her to carry Alan's things. A brief argument erupts between Hitomi, Merle, and Milerna, ending with Hitomi accidentally revealing she's from the Mystic Moon. At the castle, Alan informs King Aston about Zybok's attack, but Aston refuses to act, claiming Zybok is their ally. Aston then introduces Fulkin, who accuses Fenelia of provoking the conflict and demands that Escaflowne be handed over. Much to Alan's frustration, Aston agrees. Later, Hitomi enters a room wearing a dress Milerna lent her. She stops a maid from throwing away her clothes, and the group receives a message from Alan telling them to visit the bazaar without him. As they prepare to leave, Vaughn gives Hitomi her duffel bag. Meanwhile, Crusade crew members attempt to hide Escaflowne, but the royal guard arrives and declares they're seizing Escaflowne under the king's orders. At the bazaar, Hitomi is amazed by the diverse animal-like people. Vaughn spots Fokin and two Zybok soldiers on a bridge and chases after them. Hitomi, while listening to a CD that reminds her of Yukari and Amano, suddenly has a vision of Vaughn being struck by lightning. Alarmed, she and Merle run after him, leaving Milerna behind. Vaughn tries to catch Fulkin, who disappears into an alley before boarding a carriage. When Vaughn reaches the bridge, he spots the floating fortress behind a nearby mountain. He calls out to Fulkin, who turns and calmly invites Vaughn to join Zybok, claiming it will end all wars. Meanwhile, in the Veyone, Dillendow obsessively picks at his facial wound. When warned by Gatti, he lashes out violently. Fulkin tells Vaughn he lost his arm to a dragon 10 years ago and was saved by Emperor Dornkirk. As they speak, Dillendow readies his shot from afar. Hitomi and Merle race through the streets, with Hitomi tearing her dress to run faster. Dillendow, ignoring warnings, fires. Just as the shot reaches the bridge, Hitomi leaps in and knocks Vaughn out of its path. Dillandow's machine overheats and burns. Vaughn, convinced Fulkin tried to kill him, is denied by his brother, who walks away as the royal guard arrives to arrest Vaughn. Later, Vaughn stands inside Escaflowne in a grand arena. King Aston declares Vaughn must prove himself in battle as a gesture of friendship. A bounty hunter named Sajima is introduced as his opponent. Watching from the stands, Merchant Maiden asks why Alan isn't fighting, and Aston says he'll handle Alan later. Hitomi wonders if this battle is the one she foresaw. Then, the doors open. 2 more opponents appear. Vaughn faces off against 3 bounty hunters in their Gaimalefs, all eager for the king's reward. With swift, calculated strikes, Vaughn disables all 3, destroying one energist with the hilt of his sword, crushing another, and impaling the third. The fight ends in seconds, stunning the onlookers. Vaughn exits Escaflowne, and King Aston praises him. Hitomi starts to speak, but Alan criticizes the match as dishonorable. Vaughn calmly replies that such encounters are part of real combat. That evening, a celebration is held in Escaflowne's honor. Aston's advisors suggest disguising the Gaimalef to avoid Zybok's detection, and Vaughn agrees. Meanwhile, Maiden, a wealthy merchant, asks about Hitomi's origins. Milerna covers for her, saying she's from a distant land. Milerna then approaches Alan privately, hinting at her interest in him. But her older sister, Ares, interrupts and coldly reveals Milerna is engaged to Maiden's son, Dryden. Hitomi is surprised and drinks too much wine. Milerna complains about the engagement, saying she barely knows Dryden, who is constantly traveling. On the Veyone, Dillendow violently smashes a wine bottle, frustrated by the delay in capturing Escaflowne. Gatti arrives with orders from General Adelphos. Zybok will soon invade Fried, and Escaflowne must be seized first. Fulkin reminds Dillendow to act carefully, as Asturias Harbor will be a key staging ground. Still, he promises Dillendow that if Vaughn is captured, he can do what he pleases with him. Back at the palace, Alan helps the drunk Hitomi to her room, only to be confronted by Ares. She warns him not to get close to Milerna, accusing him of seeing their late sister Marlene in her. Alan denies it and says he'll never love again. Ares sees Hitomi nearby and calls him a liar. Later that night, Vaughn trains alone on the rooftop. Alan joins him for a sparring match and wins again. As Vaughn leaves, Milerna approaches Alan. Though he resists at first, she persuades him not to push her away. On her way up the stairs, Hitomi crosses paths with Vaughn, who warns her not to continue. She ignores him and walks in on Milerna and Alan sharing a kiss. Devastated, Hitomi runs off in tears. She lashes out at Merle, who had been trying to comfort her, and Merle retreats to the roof. As Merle looks out over the city, 3 hidden gecko men seize the opportunity to kidnap Hitomi. Merle witnesses the abduction and rushes to alert Vaughn. The kidnappers escape in a small watercraft, and Hitomi, heartbroken over Alan, doubts he'll rescue her. Meanwhile, Zybok agents spot Escaflowne, disguised and moving through the city. The cover is blown, and Fulkin informs Aston, who grants permission to pursue it. Dillendow eagerly launches his Gaimalef, ignoring warnings not to harm civilians. Escaflowne catches up to the kidnappers, pulls their boat from the water, and Vaughn tears it apart to save Hitomi. She's shocked Vaughn, not Alan, rescued her. Suddenly, Dillendow attacks, setting buildings ablaze. Vaughn urges him to stop, but Dillendow blames Vaughn for the destruction. As Escaflowne transforms into a dragon and flies off, Alan blocks Dillandow's path in Sherazade, warning him against further damage. Escaflowne escapes palace, and Hitomi quietly says goodbye to Alan. Hitomi dreams of being back on Earth, hearing her beeper go off. She turns around to find Alan standing behind her. The two enjoy themselves at various Earth locations, but just as they're about to kiss, Malerna arrives in a carriage. Alan pushes Hitomi aside and embraces Malerna. Heartbroken, Hitomi watches as lightning strikes a tower, and the ground beneath her collapses, sending her into a chasm. A winged boy rescues her, mirroring the vision she had earlier. Hitomi wakes up, and Merle teases her for calling out to Alan in her sleep. Merle then playfully reveals that she ate all the food Hitomi had in her duffel bag and tosses around her stolen belongings, including her lipstick and pager. Hitomi, angry, yells at Merle, who runs off to Escaflowne. Later, Vaughn practices with his sword, and Hitomi remarks that her pendant resembles the crystal on Escaflowne's chest. She tells Vaughn that her grandmother gave it to her. Vaughn inquires about her family, and Hitomi shares about her life on Earth. Vaughn opens up about his parents' death and Fulcon's betrayal of Fenelia. He promises Hitomi he'll find a way to return her to the Mystic Moon. Meanwhile, a fleet of floating fortresses arrives in Palace, and Alan observes them from his prison cell. Malerna argues with her father, King Aston, about allowing Zybok to pass through their country, realizing that Zybok plans to attack the nearby duchy of Fried. At the Dragon's Graveyard, a Zybok excavation site, the commander requests more energists from General Adelphos. Vaughn, guided by a tarot reading from Hitomi, flies Escaflowne to the site. He lands nearby, preparing to stop Zybok from obtaining more energists, which power Gaimalefs and Leviships. Malerna distracts the guard holding Alan, allowing Gaddis to knock him out. Meanwhile, Vaughn explains to Hitomi how drag energists are harvested from dead dragons. He prepares to attack the excavation site. In Asturia, Malerna informs Alan of Zybok's plans to invade Fried. Alan kisses Malerna before returning to the Crusade, where Ares demands Malerna return to the castle. At the excavation site, Vaughn attacks, quickly taking out 2 Zybok Gaimalefs. He tries to destroy the Energist storehouse, but is ambushed by another Gaimalef. Vaughn defeats it, but is captured when the commander holds Hitomi hostage. Vaughn is tied up and tortured, while Hitomi and Merle, who is hiding nearby, watch. The commander threatens Hitomi with a poisonous snake, but when her beeper goes off, Vaughn seizes the opportunity, freeing himself and killing the guards. He cuts off the snake's head and defeats the commander, who falls to his death. Vaughn gets back into Escaflowne and transforms it into dragon mode, aiming to destroy the Energist storehouse. As Escaflowne's Energist glows, the storehouse explodes, causing the ground to crack. Hitomi slips and falls into one of the crevices. Vaughn jumps after her, sprouting wings, just as in Hitomi's vision, and saves her. Later, Hitomi awakens in the woods to hear her beeper go off again. It's Amano, trying to reach her from Earth. Vaughn stands behind her, his wings still visible. Hitomi holds her pager, tears streaming down her face, as Vaughn steps up behind her with his wings revealed. Merle tries to prevent Hitomi from noticing, but a feather falls into Hitomi's hand, triggering a vision. She sees a winged woman, then a man with a mustache, followed by the man's deathbed and the woman grieving at his grave. She realizes this is Vaughn's mother and father. Meanwhile, the crusade travels through a cliff-filled area. Gaddis suggests another route, but Alan insists this is the quickest path to Fried without being detected by Zybok. In Asturia, Malerna has left on a boat with the Mole Man, recalling an argument with her sister, Ares. Ares felt that Malerna was neglecting her responsibilities in Asturia by focusing on her medical studies, while Malerna confessed her love for Alan before leaving. Meanwhile, Hitomi has another vision of herself in a candlelit room, hearing people speak ill of the Draconians. She sees herself on a roof in Fenelia, where a young Vaughn sprouts wings and flies, surprising everyone below. She then sees a conversation between Fenelia men in the woods, including a young Balgus and King Goau, who discusses leaving to improve himself. They encounter a winged woman named Vari, a Draconian, and despite Balgus's warnings, Goau approaches her. Hitomi realizes this is Vaughn's mother, Vari. Later, Hitomi witnesses Vaughn's birth and his first attempt at flight. His wings are weak, and he falls, but Vari swoops in to save him. She tells him to keep his wings hidden until the right time. Hitomi continues to watch as Vaughn's mother weeps at Goau's deathbed. At his grave, Vaughn promises to take his brother's place and be a strong king. In the present, as they travel on Escaflowne, Vaughn tells Hitomi that his mother searched for his missing brother in the forest but never returned. Hitomi, moved, tells Vaughn his wings are beautiful. In Zaibach, Emperor Dornkirk examines his destiny prognostication engine and says he cannot foresee the future because of the dragon. At the same time, Escaflowne walks through the woods with Hitomi and Merle on its shoulders. Hitomi senses something amiss, and soon, Dillendow and his dragon slayers find Escaflowne. The group is ambushed from all sides, but thanks to Hitomi's warnings, Vaughn is able to dodge their attacks. Dillendow orders his men to capture Vaughn alive, but as the battle intensifies, Escaflowne is surrounded. Vaughn fights back, knocking down multiple Gaimalefs. Suddenly, the crusade appears, with Alan jumping out of Sherazade to assist. He defeats Shesta and attacks Dillendow, freeing Vaughn. As the battle rages, Vaughn takes down Miguel, but Dillendow retaliates, shooting liquid metal at Escaflowne. In the chaos, one of the Krima Claws heads for Hitomi, and Alan sacrifices himself to save her, impaled by the attack. As a freed fleet arrives, Dillendow retreats, unwilling to expose his plans. On the freed ship, Alan's wound proves grave, and with no healer aboard, Malerna arrives, persuaded by the Mole Man to perform the operation. She successfully operates on him with Gaddis' help. Meanwhile, Miguel, a captive from the fight, is forced out of his Gaimalef. Hitomi prays for Alan's recovery as the fleet nears freed. The crew of the Crusade anxiously waits to see if Alan will survive his injuries. Malerna informs them that the operation was successful, but faints from the stress. Upon arriving at Godishim, the capital of Fried, the crew gains easy access to the country due to Malerna's sister Marlene's marriage to the late King of Fried. Marlene passed away 3 years ago, leaving behind her son, Prince Chid. Malerna, Gaddis, and Vaughn visit Chid in the throne room, where he welcomes them and eagerly asks about Alan, whom he has heard many stories about from his mother. When Chid mistakes Vaughn for Alan, his advisor Voris corrects him, revealing that Vaughn is the king of Fenelia. Chid apologizes and invites them to meet Alan, who has not fully recovered. When Chid sees Alan's injuries, he expresses disappointment, believing the stories of Alan's strength were false. Alan eventually wakes up and Malerna introduces him to Chid. Upon seeing Chid's ring, Alan suddenly becomes alert, warning that Zaibach will soon attack Fried. Vaughn explains that Alan abandoned Asturia to warn Fried. Later, Gaddis and Vaughn speak with Voris, who mentions that they have a monk named Plaktu interrogating their captive, Miguel. Meanwhile, in the Vione, Dillendow is confident that Miguel won't reveal anything, but Falcon is concerned due to Plaktu's hypnotic abilities. Dillendow orders Zongi, a shape-shifting doppelganger, to infiltrate Fried. That night, Malerna returns Hitomi's duffel bag and suggests they be on good terms before leaving. As the ship carrying Plaktu nears Fried, Dillendow and Zongi watch from above. Zongi infiltrates the ship using a Krima Claw, while Malerna speaks with Alan in his room. The next morning, Vaughn asks Hitomi to teach him how to detect an invisible Gaimalef, like she did before. While practicing in the courtyard, Vaughn struggles to find Merle but manages to locate her easily, impressing Chid, who asks Hitomi how she did it. Merle taunts Hitomi, and they end up fighting. Chid, amazed by Hitomi's abilities, asks if she can predict the future for him. In the throne room, Plaktu, now disguised as Zongi, arrives and hypnotizes Voris into a trance before going to see Miguel. Zongi dehypnotizes Voris and then interrogates Miguel, who reveals that Alan and Vaughn had planned to attack Fried. Chid and Voris find it hard to believe this, and Alan asks Hitomi to use the tarot cards to read about Miguel. Hitomi's reading shows a bleak future, drawing a blank card for Miguel. Just then, Miguel escapes the Gaimalef hangar, and Fried guards take Alan and Hitomi prisoner, shocking Malerna. Chid accuses Alan of betrayal, and they are informed of Miguel's escape. Miguel, in his Alcide, stands in the courtyard preparing to flee, but Vaughn arrives in Escaflowne to stop him. Miguel, though injured, still uses his ability to turn invisible. Vaughn struggles to find him, but with Hitomi's earlier lesson, he locates Miguel and destroys his Gaimalef, severing its arm before finishing the attack. Miguel, now injured, stumbles away, but Fried's Gaimalefs intervene, capturing Escaflowne. In the shadows, Zongi strangles Miguel to keep his secret. Hitomi and Alan are thrown into a cell, and Chid confronts Alan, expressing his disillusionment. Alan asks if Chid has ever truly trusted anyone, and Hitomi realizes there is a deeper connection between the two. The Crusade's crew, held in a jail cell, shouts at the guards. Down the hall, Hitomi is brought into a dark room for interrogation, where Chid, confined in a nearby cell, watches. He expresses his desire to trust her but hesitates, deciding to wait for Plaktu's reading. Plaktu, actually Zongi in disguise, arrives and begins the questioning. Meanwhile, Vaughn yells at Voris, frustrated by the delay in Hitomi's interrogation, especially with the threat of Zybok looming. Voris informs them that a messenger from Asturia delivered news of a bounty on Alan and Escaflowne. Milerna vouches for Alan's truthfulness, but Voris insists they wait for Plaktu's report. Under hypnosis, Plaktu asks Hitomi how she discovered the Energist excavation site and the Veone. Hitomi reveals that she used dowsing with her pendant. Voris believes Hitomi's powers support Miguel's claims. Plaktu demands to see her pendant, and when he touches it, the room darkens. And Zongi's disguise is revealed. Everyone, except for Hitomi and Plaktu, is paralyzed, while Zongi watches a replay of him taking Plaktu's body. Hitomi confronts Zongi, calling him a doppelganger. Zongi recalls an encounter where he killed his brother while taking someone else's form. Foken had once offered Zongi a position in Zybok, but Zongi had planned to kill Hitomi. Just as he prepares to do so, liquid metal surrounds him, choking him and threatening Hitomi's life as well. In reality, Hitomi collapses and her heart stops. Plaktu is shaken, but alive. Chid and Milerna rush to Hitomi's side, and guards hurry to Vaughn's cell, telling him that Hitomi is dead. Chid enters, delivering the grim news. Taking advantage of the situation, Alan grabs Chid as a hostage, threatening the guards to release them. With the guards in line, Milerna attempts CPR on Hitomi, but to no avail. Alan, Vaughn, and Merle are freed and rush to the room where Milerna is working on Hitomi. Vaughn, following Milerna's instructions, continues CPR until Hitomi finally regains consciousness. Alan releases his grip on Chid, revealing the weapon he used was just Merle's nail file. Hitomi, still disoriented, warns that the doppelganger will die. At that moment, Zongi, filled with panic, flees into the woods. He sees a vision of trees turning into liquid metal and heads to a nearby temple to report to Dillandau. Back at the castle, Hitomi tells Chid that Plaktu was a Zybok spy, but no one can locate him. Vaughn urges them to release the prisoners so they can catch the spy. Chid, deciding to trust Alan, cuts his bindings and asks him to find Zongi. However, due to Alan's condition, Vaughn and Hitomi are allowed to go in their place. As they depart on Escaflowne, Chid explains that he trusts Vaughn because of Alan's faith in him. At the temple, Zongi tells Dillandau about Hitomi's abilities. Dillandau recalls moments when Hitomi helped Vaughn and foiled Zybok's plans. Meanwhile, Vaughn and Hitomi approach the temple, and Hitomi senses Zongi's imminent death. Zongi is crushed by liquid metal just as Escaflowne flies overhead. Dillandau, Shesta, and Gatti engage Escaflowne in battle. Hitomi, now conscious, tells Vaughn to imagine their location in his mind, and with this focus, Vaughn disables Dillandau's outsides, cutting off its stealth cloak and eventually defeating it. Dillandau retreats, unable to pursue. The next day, the crew is freed when Plaktu's dried corpse is found in the forest. Chid expresses his trust in them, saying he would have believed them regardless. Just then, word arrives that Duke Fried has returned. A grand ceremony is planned to welcome him, and Hitomi wonders what the Duke is like. In the throne room of Fried, Duke Mahad Dalfried speaks with Vaughn about Fenelia and the threat of Zybok. The Duke expresses his anger at Alan for abandoning Asturia, which he sees as a betrayal of their alliance. Chid tries to defend Alan, but his father rebukes him, claiming Alan jeopardized the country's safety. Milerna interrupts, explaining that she, too, left Asturia to warn Fried about Zybok's plans, emphasizing that Fried is the next target. The Duke, acknowledging the gravity of the situation, asks Alan and his companions to join the fight against Zybok. As the Duke leaves, Hitomi watches with concern. Meanwhile, aboard the Veone, Foken discusses Hitomi's abilities with Dornkirk, revealing that she is from Earth. Dornkirk is intrigued and eager to witness her powers firsthand, remembering the Earth from his distant past. Back in Fried, preparations for war begin. Milerna tends to Alan's injuries while a mole man spy observes them from a distance. Merle discovers the spy and looks for Vaughn, who is not in the room. Hitomi stands on the balcony, watching the soldiers prepare. The sunset turns blood red, and she has another vision of Zongi's death. Merle, taunting Hitomi, tells her that Vaughn is looking for her. Elsewhere, the Crusade's crew assists Vaughn in cleaning Escaflowne's sword. Merle and Hitomi arrive, and Vaughn asks Hitomi to use her powers to predict Zybok's invasion route. Hitomi becomes upset, refusing to be used as a tool for their convenience. She expresses her fear over how her visions have come true since arriving in Gaia and storms off. Sitting by a fountain, Hitomi reflects on her past, remembering how her friends on Earth used to ask for her fortune. She decides that fortune-telling is just a game, and she will no longer do it. Malerna visits a villa behind the castle that once belonged to Marlene. Inside, Duke Fried looks at a portrait of Marlene and reminisces about how they had the villa rebuilt for her. He tells Malerna that she can use it as she wishes before leaving. Malerna explores the villa and finds a music box that plays a lullaby, triggering memories of her childhood and Marlene's wedding. She opens the box, revealing a hidden compartment with a diary inside. Outside, Vaughn practices archery with his eyes closed, attempting to imagine Hitomi's pendant, but misses the target. Chid approaches Hitomi at the fountain, expressing his worries about the war and his doubt about being a good duke. Vaughn, still struggling, finally hits the target as Hitomi and Chid discuss their wishes. Hitomi tells Chid that if he focuses on his goals, he'll eventually succeed. She offers to read his fortune using tarot cards. As Malerna reads Marlene's diary, she learns that Marlene and Alan were in love, though Marlene was forced to marry Duke Fried. Malerna is shocked to discover that Chid might be Alan's son. Hitomi, while reading Chid's tarot cards, senses a connection to Marlene and sees a vision of forbidden love. Malerna, too, is stunned by the revelation. Meanwhile, Zybok's forces, led by General Adelphos, arrive near Fried. Their Alcides units are deployed to attack Godashim. Fried's lookout reports the enemy's movements, and Duke Fried, aware of the threat, prepares for battle. Vaughn climbs into Escaflowne, ready to defend Fried. As Alan approaches Scheherazade, Malerna confronts him about Marlene, and he admits their love and the possibility that Chid is his son. The Duke, overhearing, loudly declares that Chid is his son. Meanwhile, Dylandau and the Dragon Slayers, hidden in stealth cloaks, report to Foken. Zybok troops, along with Alcide's Gaimalefs, march through the ruins of Fried. Shesta informs Dylandau that the remaining soldiers are trapped in the castle, but Dylandau decides to wait for the dragon's move and orders the Dragon Slayers to stay outside. Foken, observing from the Veone, watches the scene unfold. Inside the castle, Zybok Gaimalefs confront Vorus, who fights back valiantly in his Gaimalef. However, he is ultimately defeated when they use Crimaclaws to pierce his machine. Dylandau, witnessing the destruction, notices a group of Fried ships escaping, realizing the sacrifice made to ensure the escape. Meanwhile, Chid watches in sorrow as the castle crumbles, crying for the lost lives. Vaughn recalls his conversation with Vorus, who had urged him to escape, while Duke Fried tries to comfort Chid. In the temple, Duke Fried reveals a treasure sword with an energist to Chid, leading them to a large room where the Duke demonstrates the power of Atlantis. The sword activates a pedestal, summoning an angel visible only to Hitomi. Light reveals an ancient inscription in the language of Atlantis, and Duke Fried explains how Atlantis controlled the earth, but their hubris led to their downfall. Hitomi experiences a vision of Atlantis burning and faints. Back in reality, the Duke expresses his intent to keep this power from falling into the wrong hands, telling Chid not to let anyone claim it. Later, Vaughn practices controlling Escaflowne by visualizing it as a part of himself. Hitomi joins him, and Vaughn apologizes for earlier, telling her about his practice of dowsing. He mentions his intent to better control Escaflowne. As Vaughn walks off, Hitomi is struck by a vision of a bloodied Duke Fried, melting into the ground. She snaps out of it, only to find red rain on her hands, which vanishes as quickly as it appeared. Outside, the Fried forces prepare for battle as the Zybok troops arrive at the crater. Gaddis readies the temple's defenses. Merle prays for Vaughn's safety. The battle begins with the Alcides Gaimalefs smashing through the Fried forces. Duke Fried fights valiantly with his Chafaris, but Dylandau disables it and prepares to kill the Duke. Alan intervenes, engaging Delandau in combat, but Shehrazade's arm is severed in the process. The Duke, realizing the power of Atlantis is too dangerous, decides to give it to Zybok, believing they can use it wisely. In his final moments, he is struck by arrows and dies, leaving Alan devastated. As Vaughn fights fiercely, Delandau remains on the battlefield and Fokin orders the Zybok forces to retreat. Chid, hearing of his father's death, agrees to hand over the power of Atlantis to Zybok, hoping to rebuild Fried. He gives the treasure sword to Fokin, securing peace for the crusade. As the ship departs, Reedon informs everyone that something is wrong with Vaughn and Escaflowne. Merle, in distress, calls out for Vaughn, who lies still in Escaflowne, blood leaking from it. Merle yells in panic at Escaflowne, calling for Vaughn, as Alan, Hitomi, and the others rush to the scene. They find Vaughn badly wounded inside Escaflowne, with blood dripping from its hand. The Energist suddenly glows, and Vaughn falls out, covered in blood. Despite his injuries, Vaughn stumbles to the edge of the hangar, declaring he can still fight. Hitomi and Merle plead with him not to, but Vaughn's wings burst out of his shirt before vanishing as he collapses unconscious. Everyone realizes that Vaughn is a Draconian. On the crusade, Vaughn writhes in pain on a bench, while Alan reflects on the Draconians and Atlantis. Malerna says Vaughn's injuries are fatal, with internal wounds that can't be healed. Merle desperately asks why nothing can be done, and Malerna explains the severity of his condition. Hitomi notices that the damage to Escaflowne mirrors Vaughn's injuries, and insists that it must be repaired to save him. Alan is alerted to an approaching Asturian convoy. Aboard the ship, Dryden kisses a mermaid through glass, then leaves her to return to the ocean. His attendant questions his actions, but Dryden simply remarks that beautiful things belong in nature. He then notices the crusade docked nearby and meets Malerna, who introduces herself. Dryden is Malerna's fiancé, though she doesn't fully trust him due to his family's previous attempt to kidnap her. Later, Dryden joins Malerna for tea, making playful comments about marriage, though Malerna becomes nervous and the mood shifts. Meanwhile, at Fortuna Temple, Fokin observes the removal of the seal, and Delandau prepares to head out with the Dragon Slayers. Dryden is brought aboard the crusade, where he is amazed by Escaflowne's condition. He explains that Hispano-Gymalefs are bonded to their pilots through blood pacts, and when the Gymalef is destroyed, the pilot dies. Hitomi remembers a conversation with Vaughn before the battle, blaming herself for what's happening. Dryden activates the Hispano floating workshop, which appears above the fleet, and the Hispanos begin repairing Escaflowne. The lead Hispano demands $50 million for the repairs, and though the crusade lacks the money, Dryden agrees to pay with his convoy. Vaughn suffers intense pain while the repairs are made. Alan and the others try to hold him down as Merle cries, fearing he might die. Meanwhile, energy streams from the crater at Fortuna Temple fulfill Dornkirk's plans. The next day, Vaughn is fully healed, and Escaflowne is repaired. Vaughn thanks everyone, but Hitomi warns him not to use Escaflowne again for his own safety. Vaughn refuses, and the Hispano informs them that, due to Vaughn's draconian blood and the blood pact with Escaflowne, they cannot guarantee his survival. As Delandau and his forces approach, Vaughn takes Escaflowne into battle, despite everyone's pleas. He defeats the Dragon Slayers with ease, cutting through multiple Gymalefs. Delandau orders his troops to use stealth cloaks, but Vaughn easily sees through them. One by one, he destroys the Dragon Slayers, and Delandau watches in horror as his forces are wiped out. Shesta is the last to fall, calling for Delandau before dying. Delandau attempts to escape but is cornered by Vaughn, who prepares to finish him off. As Vaughn charges, the ghosts of the fallen Dragon Slayers appear, preventing him from striking Delandau. Escaflowne turns black and collapses, and Delandau escapes. Hitomi and Malerna approach Escaflowne, where Vaughn lies seemingly dead inside. Black mist rises from the Gymalef, and Hitomi climbs in, grabbing onto Escaflowne before passing out. She finds herself running through a desolate horizon where hundreds of ghosts, including the Dragon Slayers, walk slowly. She searches for Vaughn, but when she reaches him, her hand passes through him, and he vanishes. Malerna, in the real world, checks Hitomi's pulse, finding none. Hitomi wakes up in Atlantis, watching winged people fly by. She spots Vaughn sitting under a large tree, hunched over and seemingly broken. Despite Hitomi's attempts to reach him, Vaughn remains unresponsive. Suddenly, the ground shakes and Atlantis bursts into flames, with the winged people being killed and the landscape crumbling. Hitomi desperately tries to get Vaughn to snap out of it, but even the earth beneath them begins to collapse. Back in the real world, Merle shakes Hitomi and slaps her, urging her to save Vaughn. Hearing Merle's plea, a pillar of light appears around them as the ground continues to crumble. Vaughn regains his senses and flies them both to safety. Hitomi wakes up to find Escaflowne restored to its normal color, with Vaughn emerging unharmed. Grateful, Hitomi hugs Merle for her help. Meanwhile, Dillendow watches from a distance, mourning his fallen comrades. He throws a rose into the sky and is struck by a vision of a girl crying in a cell. Emperor Dornkirk orders Fulken to capture the dragon, and Fulken assures him that a plan is already in motion. Back on the crusade, Vaughn struggles to steady his sword, haunted by the screams of the dragon slayers he killed. Hitomi watches, worried for him. Alan tells her not to worry, sharing his own experience from years ago when he met Balgus, a man who knocked Alan to the ground and taught him how to train. Alan admits that he feels he can't compare to Balgus, and Hitomi reassures him. In her flustered state, she accidentally admits that she likes Alan, then quickly runs away. Dryden, deep in thought, reflects on Vaughn, Hitomi, and Atlantis while reading a book in his library. Milerna brings him food, but he responds rudely. Dryden then asks for a favor, and they go to see Alan, who gives him his father's log. Dryden reveals that his father was searching for Atlantis. Alan, upset over his father's past, doesn't understand Dryden's fascination with the log. Meanwhile, Milerna misinterprets Alan's words as being about Dryden and expresses gratitude for Dryden's help in repairing Escaflowne. Later, Hitomi sits by a window, upset over what she said earlier. Milerna joins her and seeks advice about a friend who is torn between two men, a playboy and a rich, smart man. Hitomi suggests avoiding the playboy or even dating both, though she also jokes about dumping them both. Milerna almost reveals she's talking about herself, but is interrupted by Merle, who demands to know if Hitomi loves Vaughn or Alan. Hitomi admits she loves Alan but worries about Vaughn. Milerna advises her that Alan is out of her league, while Merle urges her to stay away from Vaughn. Meanwhile, Narya and Aria, two leopard women working for Fulken, attack Dryden's ship, demanding Escaflowne. Vaughn, in dragon mode, intervenes, but Narya and Aria engage him in battle. Vaughn hesitates when he realizes Aria is a woman, but Narya knocks him over. Just as they prepare to strike, Merle appears, reminding them of their shared past when they were attacked as children. The two women reconsider and fly away. Vaughn thanks Merle, while Hitomi watches from nearby. Dryden, examining Alan's father's log, discovers a clue leading to the Mystic Valley, a place linked to the Draconians. The ship sets course for the valley, with Vaughn telling Hitomi that it's where the Draconians come from. Leon, Alan's father, climbs a cliff towards the summit, almost slipping but persevering. At the top, a pillar of light appears, and a young girl is delivered to the summit. Meanwhile, on the Veone, Narya and Aria report to Fulken. They mention their group of sorcerers, who will take Dillendow away and vow to give their bodies and souls to Fulken. On Dryden's ship, Dryden decides to send his assistant and ship back to Asturia. He has finished translating Alan's father's log, which is written in the language of the Mystic Moon. He plans to go to the Mystic Valley, the place Alan's father sought, and expects the others to join him. Dryden tells Alan that finding the truth about his father can only be done by going there. Vaughn also wants to learn about the Draconians. As the crusade sails toward the Mystic Valley, Dryden reads from the log. Leon recounts his journey to the Asgard continent, where he believes the Mystic Valley is located. On board a ship, the captain wants to turn back due to a storm, but Leon forces him to continue. The ship is struck by lightning and crashes into the ocean. Leon survives, floating on driftwood, and makes his way to the Asgard continent, reflecting on the girl he met years before. Alan grows upset, realizing his father abandoned his family to search for a girl. Back on Earth, Amano and Yukari speak with Hitomi's mother about her disappearance. Yukari mentions her dreams of seeing Hitomi again, and her mother remains hopeful that she's all right. Dryden continues reading the log, revealing that Leon reached a mountain during a blizzard, where he met an old man named Isaac. Isaac, who looks identical to Emperor Dornkirk, reveals he is from the Mystic Moon, surprising everyone. Meanwhile, Hitomi's mother shows Amino and Yukari a photo album where they see a picture of Hitomi's grandmother, who looks remarkably like Hitomi. Hitomi has a vision of Leon climbing the cliff and of her grandmother being transported by a pillar of light. Hitomi watches in shock, realizing the woman in the photo is her grandmother. As Leon reaches the summit, he walks toward her. That night, they talk by the edge of a cliff, but suddenly, another pillar of light appears, taking her away. Hitomi remembers her grandmother and clutches her chest. In Zybok, a sorcerer seeks permission from General Adelphos to bring Dilandau back for treatment. Adelphos agrees, knowing the sorcerers are responsible for bringing Dilandau to him. As Dilandau is transported away, the sorcerers prepare to experiment on him. Dornkirk learns that the crusade is heading for the Asgard continent and suspects they are searching for the Mystic Valley. Dryden continues reading the diary, revealing that Leon and Isaac journey through a foggy landscape before Isaac disappears. Leon proceeds toward the Mystic Valley, hoping to reunite with Hitomi's grandmother. Alan, upset, leaves the room, and Dryden taunts him. Hitomi approaches Alan, offering him comfort, and Alan wonders if he can ever forgive his father. Vaughn looks for them, and as the ship shakes in a storm, Hitomi falls into Alan's arms, surprising Vaughn. The ship navigates through a levistone and into a snowy landscape, where Dryden realizes a page is missing from the diary. The Vayone appears ahead, and Narya and Arya attack the crusade. As they engage, Escaflowne's energist glows, creating a pillar of light that transports the ship into a strange portal, the Gate of Atlantis. As the crusade disappears into the portal, Narya and Arya land nearby. Fulkin tells them there's no entrance to the Mystic Valley and orders them to wait. The crusade arrives in the Mystic Valley, passing through a large ring structure, revealing the capital of Atlantis. However, Hitomi suddenly vanishes, followed by Alan and Vaughn. Vaughn finds himself in the ruins of Fanilia, where a feather falls beside him, and he realizes where he is. He sees his mother behind him. Alan stands in a field, seeing his sister Selena briefly before she vanishes. Suddenly, his childhood home materializes in front of him. Hitomi reaches a monument, and everyone gathers around her. She reads the inscription, explaining that the Draconians, descendants of Atlantis, were born in the capital of Atlantis on the Mystic Moon. Atlantis created an evil machine to surpass the gods, converting people's desires into power, which gave them wings and altered their appearance. However, Atlantis collapsed, and the energy created a new world, Gaia, where the mistakes of Atlantis could be prevented. Hitomi is shocked to hear this, and realizes the connection to her pendant which Leon gave her. Vaughn, still in Fanilia, sees ghosts and screams. Meanwhile, the portal begins to glow, and Hitomi holds up her pendant, wishing for Vaughn and Alan to return and for everyone to leave the Mystic Valley. Veri appears and warns Hitomi not to make wishes, revealing that her anxiety, amplified by her fortune-telling, is causing these events to manifest. She tells Hitomi her fortune-telling has shaped the future, leading to tragic results like Balgas's death, Alan's injury, and Vaughn's near death. Hitomi cries in a snowy landscape, but then her grandmother appears, urging her to believe in those she loves. Alan, also in the snow, watches his injured father walk. A Zybok vehicle appears, and Leon explains that Zybok has been after the power of Atlantis since he left the Mystic Valley. Leon is surrounded by soldiers and fatally stabbed. One soldier takes Leon's diary to Dornkirk, who notices a missing page. Unable to extract the information he needs, Dornkirk leaves the diary with Leon's body. As Leon dies, he wishes to see Hitomi's grandmother once more. A pillar of light appears, and Leon gives his pendant to her, believing their wishes will come true despite the distance. Hitomi's grandmother returns to Earth, and Leon dies, his diary disappearing. Entia finds the diary and learns of Leon's death. Alan realizes his parents' love for each other never faded. Leon tells Alan to be true to his wishes and disappears. Suddenly, Hitomi appears in front of Alan and grabs his hand, pulling him closer to the others. Meanwhile, Narya and Arya attempt to enter the Mystic Valley in their tearings. Fulkin warns them of the danger, but they press on and make it inside. Vaughn, still reluctant to fight, kneels in sorrow. Narya and Arya appear from the portal, and Escaflowne, piloted by Vaughn, appears behind them. Balgus urges Vaughn to fight, and he unsheathes his sword. Hitomi's grandmother appears once more, telling Hitomi to believe in Vaughn and change their fate. Vaughn accepts the karma of war and raises Escaflowne's sword. A pillar of light emerges from the portal, cracking the ring and sweeping the floating fortress and the tearings away. Vaughn and the others find themselves in a snowy landscape. Vaughn steps out of Escaflowne, and his mother appears before him, saying his wishes will shape Gaia's future before flying away, leaving behind an energist. The crystal on Escaflowne's chest glows mysteriously. A pillar of light surrounds Hitomi and Escaflowne, transporting them away, with Alan following in pursuit. In Dornkirk's fortress, scientists report to him as he prepares to change destiny. He orders the redirection of fate, and the energy from Zybok's capital causes the city to glow. The room grows dark as Hitomi, Alan, and Vaughn appear on a lower level. Vaughn attempts to open Escaflowne's cockpit but can't. They look up at the destiny prognostication engine and realize they are in Zybok. Vaughn draws Alan's sword, intent on killing Dornkirk, but Dornkirk claims killing him will not stop the conflicts on Gaia. He explains that, like the Atlanteans, he has the ability to predict destiny. Hitomi asks Dornkirk if he is Isaac, and he confirms it, revealing he was given that name on Earth. Alan mentions his father, and Dornkirk realizes Alan is Leon's son. Dornkirk explains that he will complete the Atlantis machine. Hitomi accuses him of causing Gaia's problems, but Dornkirk claims that conflict and death would have occurred without him. He tells them about his obsession with gravity and destiny, and how, on Earth, he couldn't find answers. When he awoke in Gaia, he saw a barren land with few civilizations. He helped the people with science, and the nation of Zybok was born. Dornkirk became aware of Atlantis and their ability to control destiny, and decided to build a machine to replicate their power. He talks about the Atlanteans using their power to create Gaia, and how he needed Escaflowne and the power spot under Fried to complete his machine. The Fate Alteration Engine is now ready, and Dornkirk believes it will reshape fate for the better. Hitomi, horrified by the cost of this plan, says it's wrong. She faints after having a vision of the world's destruction. Meanwhile, on the Crusade, Dryden and Milerna discuss their return to Asturia, unaffected by the other's disappearance. In Zybok, sorcerers examine Escaflowne, eager to uncover its secrets. Meanwhile, Vaughn, Hitomi, and Alan awaken in separate cages. Hitomi shares her vision of Gaia's destruction, warning that the Fate Alteration Engine could doom the world. Vaughn senses Escaflowne's pain and, encouraged by Hitomi, tries to connect with it through his will. As they hold hands, Escaflowne breaks free and transforms into its dragon form. Escaflowne crashes into their prison and frees them. As they escape, a Zybok Gaimalef blocks their path. Vaughn stays to fight while Hitomi and Alan head for the roof. Vaughn defeats more enemies and rejoins them in Escaflowne, helping them escape. Pursued by Alcides, Vaughn pushes Escaflowne faster. Dornkirk, realizing Hitomi's importance, decides to separate her from Vaughn. As they pass the Vione, Falcon silently watches. After reaching safety, Escaflowne turns back into a dragon. Hitomi reflects on Dornkirk, the man from the mystic moon. In a vision of the future, Hitomi stands on Escaflowne, watching it destroy a group of Alcides. The Zybok generals question Falcon about Escaflowne and Hitomi, and Dornkirk warns that an army of dragons will destroy the Zybok Empire. In another vision, an army of Escaflowne blasts down a fleet of floating fortresses with beams from their shoulders. Dornkirk appears on a screen saying they must separate Hitomi and the dragon. Falcon suggests using the attraction between a man and a woman to achieve this goal. Meanwhile, on the Crusade in Pallas, 3 weeks have passed since their return from Zybok. Milerna and Dryden announce their marriage, and Dryden believes with Asturia's strength and his wealth, Zybok won't be able to invade. However, Vaughn, still thinking about Dornkirk, fears Gaia's destruction is inevitable. Eris enters and mentions that Aston has fallen ill since Alan and Milerna's betrayal of the country. Milerna intervenes, and Alan congratulates her on her marriage with a kiss on her hand. Later, Milerna asks Hitomi about a dress for her wedding. Hitomi seems worried, and Milerna reassures her everything will be fine. Hitomi reflects on her feelings for Alan and admits to herself that she still loves him, feeling guilty towards Dryden. She wishes she hadn't said anything, but Milerna, thinking Hitomi sounds childish, asks her to do a future reading. Hitomi, without her cards, promises to do it later and runs off, feeling like a jerk. Vaughn catches up with her, sensing something is wrong, but she doesn't tell him. Back in Zybok, the crew works on the fate alteration engine. Fulkin enters a large chamber where Dornkirk expresses concern about the growing bond between Vaughn and Hitomi. However, Fulkin insists Vaughn isn't ready to cross that line yet. Vaughn, alone with Hitomi in a barn, expresses his desire for her to stay close to him. Hitomi looks troubled as Vaughn insists she's needed for their battle against Zybok. Her anger builds, and she storms off, calling Vaughn an idiot as she throws a rock into the water. In Zybok, Dornkirk fears they almost lost their chance, but Fulkin reassures him that preparations are ready. Alan, visiting his father's grave, speaks with Eries, who mentions Milerna will be happy with Dryden. Alan agrees, stating Dryden is a good man. Meanwhile, Fulkin plans to use the fate alteration engine to influence Hitomi's heart, manipulating her feelings for Vaughn. He holds onto two hairs, one from Hitomi and one from Alan, taken when they were held in the Zybok cages. On a rainy night in Asturia, Hitomi walks alone, feeling cold and regretful about falling in love from this world. She runs into Alan, and they meet on a bridge, sharing a kiss. At the same time in Zybok, Fulkin and Arya activate the fate alteration engine and kiss as Dornkirk declares a new destiny begins. Just then, Vaughn arrives and sees Hitomi and Alan kissing. Hitomi is left speechless after seeing Alan, and when she notices Vaughn a few feet away, he briefly smiles before running off. That night, Merle dries Vaughn's wet shirt by the fire and suggests he should leave Hitomi alone. Meanwhile, Alan escorts Hitomi to her room, urging her to get to bed early to avoid catching a cold before tomorrow's wedding. In Zybok, Narya and Arya duel with daggers, with Narya emerging victorious. Arya brags about having kissed Master Fulkin, but Narya, leaning over her, asks her how it felt. Arya admits that the kiss shattered her dreams of receiving Fulkin's love, and they reflect on their childhood when they were saved from a mob by Fulkin. He had brought them to safety, and after their biting response, promised them a better fate with new names. They now question whether their fortune has really improved, since they still haven't been able to defeat Escaflowne. Fulkin enters and promises to enhance their luck. The next morning, Milerna searches for a necklace to wear, finding one given to her by the mole man who had been watching her. In Zybok, Arya and Narya undergo an implantation procedure using fortune blood from fortunate people, integrated with the fate alteration engine to boost their luck. Fulkin activates the machine. Back in Palace, the knights, including Alan, prepare for the wedding. Hitomi watches from a balcony, reflecting on the events of the previous night. Milerna joins her, anxious about the wedding. Desperate for guidance, Milerna asks Hitomi to read her fortune. Hesitant, Hitomi lays out the tarot cards, revealing Milerna's anxiety over a marriage forced upon her for political reasons. Hitomi sees that Milerna will grieve over someone else if she marries. She draws the Tower card, signaling that the marriage is wrong, and then notices the Emperor card, symbolizing good fortune. Hitomi wonders if she can alter destiny so that Milerna ends up with Dryden and Alan is available for her. She shows Milerna the Emperor card, assuring her that she will find happiness with Dryden. The wedding ceremony begins with Milerna and Dryden traveling toward each other by boat. Merle and Vaughn watch from a rooftop, while Aston, Maiden, and Eries look on from the castle balcony. As the priest begins the ceremony, the Veone approaches Pallas with its stealth cloak activated. Dornkirk orders Fulkin to take advantage of the opportunity to capture Hitomi, even suggesting they dispose of the dragon if it interferes. Narya and Arya, now with enhanced fortune blood, set out to capture her. Hitomi, caught in a vision of the capital's destruction, watches as Dryden places the ring on Milerna's finger. Another vision of catastrophe overwhelms her, and she rushes toward them. Escaflowne unleashes a beam of energy, and the Veone appears overhead. Narya and Arya engage in battle, their newfound luck making them formidable opponents. As people scramble for safety, Vaughn in Escaflowne faces off against Arya, but her good fortune causes him to miss, sending Escaflowne crashing to the ground. Amidst the chaos, Hitomi emerges from the rubble to find Milerna and Dryden. As Dryden tends to his injuries, Milerna uses her torn dress to bandage him. Escaflowne crashes nearby, and Narya and Arya appear. From the floating fortress, Vulcan demands that Hitomi be handed over to them. Hitomi, realizing her role in altering fate, confesses to Milerna that the tarot cards showed the marriage was wrong and that she truly belongs with Alan. Feeling responsible for the disaster, she surrenders herself to Narya and Arya's tearings. Vaughn charges at Arya, who has Hitomi trapped with her liquid metal claws. As Vaughn leaps to save her, the fate alteration engine begins malfunctioning. Arya knocks Vaughn away with her Gaimalef's hand, and both she and Narya decide to capture Vaughn, believing it will please Vulcan. Suddenly, the Veone shifts its position, and the sun shines again, weakening Narya and Arya. Hitomi slips from their grasp, but Alan catches her. Vulcan orders them to return to the Veone, but as they fly off, Narya's energist glows, causing her Gaimalef to explode, crashing to the ground. Arya escapes safely. Later, people work to put out fires and repair the damage. Narya hides under a bridge, and the townspeople sit in the ruined square. Hitomi feels guilty, but Dryden and Milerna reassure her that it would have happened anyway. In the Veone, Emperor Dornkirk questions Vulcan about why he pulled back Narya and Arya. Vulcan watches over Arya, injured in bed, expressing concern for Narya, but Arya reassures him she'll be fine. Meanwhile, Narya, feeling ill, escapes the castle, despite her worsening condition. Hitomi and the others care for the injured in the square, while Vaughn vows to kill Vulcan, the puppet master of the Zybok forces. Alan is shocked to learn that Vulcan is Vaughn's brother. That night, Hitomi slips while carrying plates and drops them, noticing one of her shoes is damaged. Narya kidnaps her, and Merle later realizes she's missing. The royal guard searches the streets, and Vaughn heads to Escaflowne. Narya, holding Hitomi captive, boards a boat. Hitomi sees a vision of a burning building with Narya and Arya's dead parents, realizing their tragic past. Narya and Arya were injected with enhanced fortune blood, leading to their current fate. The carriage carrying Narya and Hitomi crashes. Narya is injured, but Hitomi decides to help her. Narya refuses to return to Asturia, trusting only Vulcan. Hitomi realizes Narya is in love with him. Meanwhile, Dornkirk orders Vulcan to send Arya to attack Asturia's port. Vulcan is reluctant due to Arya's condition, but eventually agrees. Vaughn, flying on Escaflowne, confronts Arya, who avoids him. Escaflowne goes out of control and crashes, but Vaughn manages to recover. As he searches for Vulcan, the Veone appears in front of him. Narya brings Hitomi to a stolen ship for Vulcan. Hitomi tries to persuade Narya that her actions are wrong, but Narya slaps her. Hitomi, reflecting on her grandmother's words, trusts Narya, believing she's not evil. Arya arrives in her tearing, and Vaughn crashes Escaflowne into the Veone, disabling its stealth cloak. Inside, Vaughn attacks the Veone's equipment. Narya and Arya, weakened and aged, try to stop them but fail. Narya releases Hitomi and boards her sister's Gaimalef, heading to the Veone. Alan arrives with the crusade to rescue Hitomi. In the Veone, Vulcan faces Vaughn. Just as Vaughn raises his sword to kill him, Arya crashes into Escaflowne. The explosion caused by Escaflowne's energist throws it out of the Veone, causing the Veone to collapse into the ocean. Vulcan cradles the dying Narya and Arya in his arms as Dornkirk appears, revealing that the answer they sought has been found. However, Vulcan denies his claim and the screen explodes. In the ruins of Finalia, Vulcan reflects on his failure and the recent deaths of Narya and Arya, wondering why his wish remains unfulfilled. In Palace, Asturia's council meets, including Maiden, Dryden, Alan, and Vaughn. Some advisors suggest handing Hitomi over to Zybok to avoid conflict. Alan strongly objects, warning that Zybok will bring destruction like they did to Atlantis. Dryden argues they should impose economic sanctions instead, and reminds them that survivors of Zybok's attacks won't tolerate surrender. Vaughn recalls childhood memories of people insulting Vulcan and how he defended his brother. After the meeting, Vaughn and Alan find Hitomi and Merle waiting outside. The advisors pass by, glaring at Hitomi. Vaughn, still filled with rage, storms off with Merle. Alan stays behind to comfort Hitomi. That night, Hitomi sits in her room, thinking about Narya's final words. Her pendant begins to glow. Meanwhile, Vaughn meets a wolfman messenger in the forest, who says the tribe leader Room sent him. Vulcan is waiting in Finalia. Vaughn recalls people calling Fokin a coward when he left Fenelia and how Balgus believed he would return. Vaughn retrieves Escaflowne and meets Hitomi along the way. Later, Alan and the others discover both are missing. Milerna and Gaddis arrive with news that Hitomi's room is empty. Merle panics, thinking Hitomi seduced Vaughn, and the mole man confirms he saw them together. Alan ponders whether keeping Hitomi trapped like a bird in a cage is right. Meanwhile, Vaughn and Hitomi fly through the skies on Escaflowne. Vaughn suspects a trap, but Hitomi trusts Room. Vaughn promises to take her back to the Mystic Moon, or to Alan. In Zybok, the sorcerers assure Dornkirk that Fokin's plan is progressing. Though the generals are unsure of Dornkirk's silence, General Adelphos is disturbed when he sees a strange woman in the garden, calmly observing a snail. In Fenelia, Fokin talks with Room and waits for Vaughn, confident he'll come. When Vaughn and Hitomi arrive, Room greets Hitomi and departs. Vaughn furiously confronts Fokin, accusing him of destroying Fenelia. Suddenly, land dragons appear, confirming Vaughn's fear of a trap. As they flee, Fokin urges Vaughn to let go of his anger to make the dragons disappear. One attacks, but Vaughn and Hitomi evade it. Fokin recalls how he lost his arm during a dragon hunt and was abandoned to die. However, the dragon spared him. He awoke on a lighted table with Dornkirk explaining that he had the power of Atlantis and should help build a peaceful Gaia. Fokin, horrified by his mechanical arm, eventually joined Dornkirk and became a sorcerer. As dragons attack again, Hitomi is separated but saved by Fokin. She notices his mechanical arm and compares him to Narya, shocking Fokin. He insists he wants to change fate. On the roof, Vaughn battles the dragons until Fokin flies in, his wings now black. He shields Vaughn and demands he drop his sword. When Vaughn does, the dragons vanish. Fokin tells Vaughn his rage draws danger and that he wants to change fate to prevent war. He admits Zybok's methods were wrong and asks Vaughn to help him defeat Dornkirk. Hitomi quietly observes, struck by the darkness of Fokin's wings. The Asturian advisors are stunned by Fokin's request for asylum. Though disturbed by Dornkirk's desire to destroy Gaia, they remain wary of Fokin's motives. Hitomi explains that Asturia accepted him under a treaty with neighboring nations to gather intelligence on Zybok. Fokin assists with salvaging wreckage from the Veone, but Vaughn remains distrustful of his brother. In town, efforts to rebuild continue. At the church, Hitomi, Vaughn, and others help care for people displaced by Zybok's attacks. When Alan, Dryden, and Milerna arrive, they join the efforts, and Dryden shares supplies with the children, while Vaughn warns him that Zybok may strike again. Merle is teased by children, and Hitomi asks Vaughn what games he played with Fokin as a child, but he coldly walks off. Alan scolds Hitomi for leaving the castle, saying Gaia needs her. He suspects she's hiding something, upsetting her. Later, while Hitomi practices sprinting in the castle courtyard, Fokin watches and asks if she misses Earth. She expresses her wish to mend the bond between him and Vaughn. Fokin is surprised by her trust, but she says he seems sincere. Vaughn watches silently from a distance. Meanwhile, allied forces from Exardia, Daedalus, Cesario, and Basram arrive in Asturia. Alan informs Hitomi that he and Vaughn are going into battle the next day and reveals that Prince Chid is his son. In Zybok, Delandau confronts a dog-like man named Jajuka, the last of his unit. Delandau becomes unhinged, but eventually composes himself, asking if his new Gaimalef is ready. The next day, the crusade departs with a large fleet. Alan tells Vaughn he proposed to Hitomi, and she will answer upon their return. Vaughn tells Alan to protect her. In Palace, Hitomi is troubled by Alan's confession. She later helps Milerna with laundry and asks her advice about a friend dealing with love troubles. They realize they're talking about Alan. Hitomi suspects Milerna still has feelings for him. As the fleet arrives at Rampart, a Zybok floating fortress appears and releases Alcides. Delandau, in his new Gaimalef Orides, leads the assault, setting the city ablaze. Vaughn and Alan deploy in their Gaimalefs. Vaughn, in Escaflowne's dragon mode, quickly defeats an enemy unit. Hitomi feels a reaction to Vaughn's actions from afar. Vaughn faces Delandau in fierce combat. Alan joins the fight, forcing Delandau to defend himself. As the battle intensifies, Jajuka enters and knocks Alan away. Alan engages him while Vaughn continues to fight. Hitomi, sensing the bloodshed, pleads for Vaughn to stop, but he presses on. Delandau attacks violently, but Vaughn resists. Suddenly, Dilandau screams, recalling a girl crying, and vanishes in a pillar of light. Jajuka follows. The Zybok fortress cloaks and disappears. Alan surveys the destruction and says they must return to palace. Overwhelmed, Hitomi wonders why fighting never ends. On a bridge in Palace, Vaughn, Alan, and the others plan their next move. Hitomi confronts them, saying she wants to return to Earth, and vanishes in a pillar of light. Hitomi wakes up in the school infirmary with Amano watching over her. Disoriented, she accidentally calls him Alan and wonders if she truly returned to Earth or is just dreaming. Meanwhile, learning Amano and Hitomi are alone together, Yukari looks sad. Hitomi tells Amano about her time in Gaia, but he brushes it off as a dream. When he sees her pendant, she talks about it like she did once before. She anticipates his next move, and as Amano leans in, Yukari walks in, shocked. Later, as Hitomi and Yukari walk home, Hitomi already knows what Yukari is going to say. Under the bridge, Yukari reveals Amano is leaving, and Hitomi realizes how much Yukari cares for him. Alone on a subway, Hitomi sees a white feather that vanishes when she touches it. In Asturia, Vaughn, Alan, Milerna, Dryden, and Foken discuss Hitomi's sudden disappearance. Foken confirms Zybok wasn't responsible. Dornkirk can't summon pillars of light. Vaughn believes she returned to the mystic moon and says it's for the best, as Zybok can no longer use her to alter fate. News arrives that Zybok forces have reached the border. In Zybok, Dornkirk is enraged over Hitomi's disappearance, saying it threatens his dream. Meanwhile, a girl arrives in a forest near Pallas through a pillar of light, leaves her Gaimalef behind, and heads toward the city. Back on Earth, Hitomi reflects on a photo of her with Amano and Yukari. She realizes Yukari has loved Amano far more deeply than she ever did. The wind blows her tarot card, the tower, to the floor. In Asturia, Alan mourns not being able to protect Hitomi, but feels peace knowing she's safe. He wonders if he saw his sister in her. Suddenly, Selena, Alan's long-lost sister, appears. On Earth, Hitomi looks at her tarot cards and draws the Ace of Serpents. She whispers that she doesn't want to return to that moment, but sees Vaughn in a vision and cries. Vaughn talks to Merle about Hitomi, and Merle tells him he still doesn't realize his feelings for her. At their mother's grave, Alan, Iris, and Selena stand together. Selena, silent and emotionless, crushes a butterfly and screams, transforming into Dilandau. Confused, Dilandau yells for Jajuka. Jajuka appears in his cloaked Gaimalef, and the two fly away. Alan later speaks with Fulkin, who suspects Zybok's sorcerers altered Dilandau's identity through experiments on kidnapped children. Hitomi, now back in class, studies Newton when a white feather reappears and vanishes. In Zybok, the sorcerers tell Dornkirk they'll manipulate gravity between Vaughn and Hitomi to bring her back. Hitomi stares at her pendant, and Yukari urges her to see Amano before he leaves. Hitomi apologizes for not realizing her feelings sooner. On Gaia, Vaughn ascends in Escaflowne as the fate alteration engine activates. As Hitomi begins to run again, Escaflowne breaks through the sky. She leaps into Vaughn's arms as they vanish in a pillar of light. Amano reaches for her, but the pendant slips from his hands. Hitomi and Vaughn land in a war-ravaged Gaia. She's returned to a land still torn by conflict. Hitomi and Vaughn find themselves on a devastated battlefield littered with wreckage. Troops from the Cesario army beg Vaughn for help. Haunted by memories of his fallen Fenellian warriors, Vaughn agrees to lead the attack but insists Hitomi return to Asturia for her safety. Though she wants to stay, Vaughn says he doesn't want to rely on her powers for warfare. Reluctantly, Hitomi is escorted away. Nearby, Zybok forces await orders. General Adelphos is frustrated by Dornkirk's silence, while in Zybok, Dornkirk declares that the zone of absolute fortune will soon be realized. In Asturia, Hitomi watches as troops prepare for battle. Alan speaks to her, revealing she previously turned down his proposal. Meanwhile, Dryden returns his wedding ring to Milerna, believing he's unworthy. He promises to improve after the war, but Milerna tells him she may not wait. Determined to stop the war, Hitomi approaches Fulkin and asks him to use a pillar of light so she can reason with Dornkirk. Instead, Fulkin says he'll face Dornkirk himself, using a machine stolen from the Vione. Hitomi has a vision of Fulkin's death and pleads with him not to go. He tells her his death is inevitable, part of the cost of his past with Zybok. That night, Milerna tells Alan what Dryden did, and Alan prepares to head into battle. Elsewhere, at a Zybok encampment, Jajuka gives Dilandau their orders. The battle erupts that night, with Zybok's machines engulfing the area in flames. Vaughn's Escaflowne and Allen's Sherazade destroy several enemy Gaimalefs. Overhead, the Basram forces decide to deploy their deadliest weapon, a massive Energist bomb. As it drops from a shuttle, Hitomi stares into the horizon from her room, and Merle weeps in fear that Vaughn won't return. The bomb detonates with a blinding flash, wiping out troops and leaving a gaping crater in the earth. The blast decimates most of the Zybok army, including 3 of the 4 generals. Adelphos' floating fortress crashes into a mountain. Vaughn, Allen, and the others stand in stunned silence. A dying Zybok soldier curses Vaughn with his last breath. Feeling Vaughn's anguish, Hitomi visits Fulkin again. She tells him she wants to stop Vaughn's pain and pleads for him not to sacrifice himself. Fulkin shows her his black wings, explaining they signify his nearing death, his punishment for following Dornkirk. Hitomi's pendant glows, reacting with Fulkin's device, and the two are transported to Zybok in a pillar of light. Back on the battlefield, Vaughn and Allen continue fighting. In Zybok, Dornkirk welcomes Hitomi and prepares to activate the Fate Alteration Engine. He reveals he manipulated fate so that Fulkin would bring Hitomi to him. Fulkin, enraged, attacks Dornkirk. He drives his sword through Dornkirk's image, but the blade shatters and mortally wounds Fulkin instead. As he dies, he declares the war will end. Vaughn senses his brother's death and cries out in agony. Hitomi, overwhelmed, weeps as her pendant glows, and Dornkirk's phantom form invites her to witness the zone of absolute fortune. The Fate Alteration Engine activates, casting a green glow across Gaia's sky. Dornkirk tells Hitomi this will fulfill everyone's wishes and bring happiness, but she remains doubtful. As the Zybok army retreats, the Basram leader declares war on the Allied forces, trying to seize power. Soon, other armies follow, descending into chaos. Allen fights through the madness, while the crusade is struck by a Basram ship and crashes after losing a Levistone. Vaughn realizes that the chaos is fueled by people's desires. Dornkirk tells Hitomi that human thoughts have caused this conflict. Dilandau arrives, unleashing destruction. Dornkirk, watching, wonders why war cannot be escaped. Jajuka searches for Dilandau, remembering when he was entrusted to protect the young Selena. Hitomi pleads with Dornkirk to stop the machine, but he says fate cannot be reversed. This is Gaia's destiny. Vaughn sees Dilandau and attacks. He disables Dilandau's Gaimalef by cutting off its limbs. As Vaughn moves to strike the final blow, Jajuka leaps in and is killed. With his last breath, Jajuka tells Dilandau it's okay to become Selena again. Dilandau, shaken, reverts to Selena, remembering her past. Vaughn prepares to attack, but Allen blocks him, revealing Dilandau as his sister. Vaughn is stunned and doesn't believe him. They fight fiercely. The Crusade crew and Hitomi watch. Dornkirk calls this their fate. As the battle intensifies, both Allen and Vaughn seem to enjoy it, believing their wishes have come true. Selena watches and calls out to Allen. Distracted, Allen is struck by Escaflowne's sword. As Vaughn's sword pierces Sherazade, he sees a vision of Hitomi. She pleads with him to stop, warning that Gaia will fall like Atlantis. Vaughn insists he must avenge Fulkin and save her, but Hitomi says violence is not the answer. She sees Fulkin, who explains that clashing wishes bring destruction. Hitomi realizes her own wish has bound Vaughn and sees him trapped in a web. As she says she loves him, the web breaks. Hitomi stands in a windy field under the sun. Vaughn hears her voice and stops fighting. Sherazade collapses, and Allen reunites with Selena. She faints, then wakes, saying she wanted to see him. Allen says he heard Hitomi's voice too. Vaughn flies Escaflowne toward Zybok to find her. Dornkirk declares fate can't be controlled, but Hitomi believes otherwise. As Escaflowne malfunctions, Vaughn uses his wings to reach the fortress. His feathers fall, and the fighting ceases. He finds Hitomi, and they reunite as Vaughn smashes the Fate Alteration Engine. Dornkirk fades away, realizing their love transcended fate. Back on Earth, girls ask Hitomi for a tarot reading, but she says she's stopped. In Fenelia, now being rebuilt, Hitomi and Vaughn visit his family's grave. Vaughn removes Escaflowne's Energist, saying it's no longer needed. Hitomi gives him her pendant and they embrace, watched by the spirits of loved ones. A pillar of light returns her to Earth. Everyone in Gaia watches her go. On Earth, as girls talk about Amano and Yukari, Hitomi looks over the water and sees Vaughn. In a fantasy world, a massive airship flies through the sky, and the crew members talk among themselves of the dragon armor. Falling from the sky, a man attacks a guard ruthlessly. The general then tells his crew that they must deliver the armor to Lord Fulkin. Just then, a man destroys the guards effortlessly with his sword. Beneath the ship, the man calls out to the dragon armor, named Escaflowne, to awaken. In the dreams of the past, a young girl toddler is seen staring at a boy, wondering who they are. Later, we find Hitomi Kanzaki, a depressed high school girl in Tokyo. Sleeping on the roof, she is interrupted by Yukari, her friend. They speak about the dream, and she tries her best to cheer her up, but Hitomi dismisses her. She then finds a note where Hitomi wants to unalive herself, but she makes sport of it. She struggles with her identity, believing that no one understands her and feels out of place in this world. One day, during a particularly low moment, she wishes to disappear. Later that day, Hitomi and Yukari are seen laughing and enjoying their time together. Suddenly, she gets depressed again. Yukari tries her best to help, but she snaps at her and Yukari leaves. Just then, she is met by Fulkin and referred to as the wing goddess. Submerged by water, she is then transported. In the land of Gaia, Alan and his crew talk about the negative effects of the armor. Hitomi awakens to find herself on the inside of Escaflowne. The armor then activates. Alan and his team plan to destroy the airship. Escaflowne then grabs Vaughn. Alan then fires and destroys the airship. Escaflowne then walks up to Vaughn, falls and opens its chest, and Hitomi falls on him. Shocked, he bows to her and asks her to let him serve her. Suddenly, the armor activates and disappears, and a jewel falls into her hand. Vaughn is upset and questions her and is prepared to kill her, thinking that she is a spy. Alan interrupts them, and they begin to argue and fight. Vaughn is then bested by him and his men. The mole then explains to Alan's men that Hitomi is the winged goddess, surprising everyone. Alan then eases the tension, offering to provide her with shelter. However, she collapses. Later, we see a son telling his father that he will kill his brother. The scene shifts to an elf woman named Sora singing a lullaby. She awakens Lord Fulkin. They converse about the winged goddess. She tells him that Hitomi has appeared to Vaughn instead of him. Later, we see the Black Dragon clan destroying villages at Lord Fulkin's orders. Hitomi is awakened by Malerna. Hitomi thinks that she is in a dream, but is slapped to reassure her that she is not. She is taken to the window and shown the beautiful land of Gaia. After this, they exchange pleasantries, and Malerna tells her that they are called the Abaharaki, who are survivors of the Black Dragon's siege. She goes on to explain the prophecy of Escaflowne to her, overwhelming her. Alan's workers ramble on about the winged goddess, and she makes everyone nervous as she passes them. Alan tells Vaughn that he should protect her, but Vaughn shrugs this off, thinking that she is not the real goddess, but Alan convinces him otherwise. Hitomi is then confronted by a cat girl named Merle. The mole man then offers to make a chain out of Hitomi's jewel. As Hitomi and Merle clean the horses, Merle tells her about Vaughn's horrific past. Later, on a hilltop, Lord Dillendow and his team prepare to ambush Alan's vessel and kidnap Hitomi. His general, Jajuka, warns him that they shouldn't be hasty, but he attacks him and prepares to assault. As an all-out war commences, lives are lost, and Hitomi is kidnapped by a creature named Nukushi. Vaughn chases them down on horseback and retrieves her. As Nukushi and Vaughn face off, it is revealed that the creature's kind is enslaved by the Black Dragon, and the only way to be freed is to give them the goddess. Suddenly, Dillendow kills the creature. Vaughn snaps and uses his magical power, which causes his team to scatter. Vaughn and Dillendow square off in an epic showdown, causing destruction. Hitomi is caught in the crossfire and falls through the ground, but Vaughn in angel form saves her. Vaughn collapses from his injuries, and Hitomi tries to assist, but is helpless as she cries out. Jajuka appears with Nukushi and converses about Vaughn accepting his death. Hitomi still decides to stay with him no matter what. Later, Dillendow is attacked by Fulkin, who expected him to bring the winged goddess to him. With fury, Dillendow attacks him, but Fulkin severely injures him. He then offers him new powers, which he accepts. In Torushina, a new armor is taken out of the bottom of the lake via a crane. This news was received by Alan, who is headed in that direction. In the Adam village, the elders talk to Hitomi and tells her to rest at their village to give Vaughn time to heal. After a while, Vaughn emerges healed, the village cheering. In the forest, Vaughn tells Hitomi about his troubled past, but Hitomi remains resolute and promises to stay by his side. Later, the Black Dragon's floating fortress lands on Torishina. Vaughn and Hitomi are updated with these events and are given a send-off by the villagers. With Torishina under siege from the Black Dragon clan, Vaughn and Hitomi search out the Abaharaki's financial backer, Mr. Dryden. They enter a tavern where they meet Dryden along with the rest of the crew. Dryden warns them of a new armor being resurrected. However, Alan is confident in Escaflowne. Later, Foken tells Sora to summon the goddess. At the bottom of the lake, sorcerers are connecting Dillendow to the new armor, claiming that impure blood can awaken the armor. Merle notices a change in Vaughn's demeanor as he makes a wooden rat for her. In Hitomi's room, she sees broken glass, which transports her to a world where Sora tells her to destroy Gaia to end its suffering. She emerges out of the vision and heads to the street where she follows Sora's song, which leads her to Foken. Foken tells her he wants her to grant him Escaflowne to destroy Gaia. Vaughn, however, stops this from happening and Foken disappears. Suddenly, Dillendow emerges in the resurrected armor to attack Vaughn and Hitomi, but is shot out of the sky from Alan's cannons. Hitomi is tormented by her visions, but the jewel on her neck activates and Escaflowne appears. Hitomi tries to stop Vaughn from entering the suit, but he reassures her. The suit then uses Vaughn's blood to activate. Vaughn and Dillendow engage in a vicious battle, destroying the surrounding area. As Dillendow releases a fire attack, Vaughn is reminded of his horrible past and begins to go berserk. After he defeats Dillendow's armor, Escaflowne changes to a dark armor and begins to destroy everything. Foken is delighted at these events, but Sora explains that the goddess will help Vaughn. As the black armor leaves, Hitomi runs to reach it. In a heartfelt plea, her voice gets through to Vaughn. In a vision, Hitomi chases after Vaughn to a tree. Vaughn, depressed, explains that he is all alone. However, Hitomi reassures him that she will never leave his side. Escaflowne regains its color and transforms to a flying dragon. They make their way to Foken and Sora. Foken tells Sora that she is free to leave, but she tells him that she will stay by his side. In the loading bay, Vaughn and Foken face off. Foken seeks to destroy Vaughn because of his hatred toward him, but he doesn't fight back. Hitomi, reckless, jumps in between their battle, causing Foken to miss. As Hitomi and Foken exchange their ideals, Jajuka rushes him and stabs him as he is also killed. Foken smiles as Vaughn calls him brother as he falls to the ground and dies. Sora, unwilling to leave Foken's side, tells the pair to leave as the fortress falls from the sky. Feathers begin to fall from the sky as Vaughn flies over the city. Dillendow and his team leave the city to look for other battles to fight. Back in Adam, Merle is seen playing with the village children. Vaughn and Hitomi share a heartfelt moment as she grows wings and disappears.